Hello and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. This is episode 58. And Mindset Mondays is an ongoing series of conversations, sort of a thought playground designed for folk with a growth mindset or those who'd like to develop one. A chance to play with new ideas, new concepts, and try on new mindsets. So if you'll take a quick moment and click share underneath this video, invite your friends, your colleagues, your community to join the conversation. All right, so here's today's playground, right? We find comfort among those who agree with us and growth among those who don't. Right? In the world of social media and hiding behind a screen and battling, yes, I'm guilty, over ideas and ideologies, it's astounding how often we surround ourselves with those who agree with us. We create our own bubble. Comfort zones are everywhere, not just the ones we create, but it takes fierce intention. It takes effort to break free of our comfort zones, to surround ourselves with folk who think differently than we do. It's easy to surround ourselves with folk who think like we do. So somebody taught me years ago, Beth and I had started Digital Positions, and somebody taught me that when in a partnership, both of you agree on everything, one of you is superfluous. And no, Beth and I didn't agree on everything, nor did we disagree on everything, but we were able to poke at the ideas, not to just automatically say, oh, that's great, let's do that, but to really play with the differences in ideas. Now, we had a lot of common history and common experience, so we agreed on a lot of things, but we played with other ideas, and not everybody who worked with us and for us agreed with everything that we said. Were we always open to people thinking differently? All right, no, we're human, and I've got a wicked stubborn streak. I think though, when I lean into the intention to play with new ideas and be with new concepts and look at things through a new prism, I can let that stubborn go, that need to be right, that desire to be agreed with, because that's where the growth is. We can look at social media and the inevitable battles on Facebook, right? The philosophical arguments. But when we look at it through this prism, that we find comfort among those who agree with us, and more importantly, growth among those who don't. How would those conversations be different? Well, first of all, they'd be conversations. People might actually be having conversations. We might have rational discourse return to the way we interact, particularly in an environment in this country where the campaign for 2020 started on election day or inauguration day in 2017. I think the toxic environment has led people to willfully and intentionally create bubbles of agreement around them because it takes less effort. Huh. So this is sort of a this just in. Yeah, it takes less effort. So with all of the toxicity in the political arena, and which cascade into social conversations, economic conversations, cultural conversations, we've created an environment where in seeking comfort, we've stopped having the hard conversations. It's an interesting question that was brought up at TEDx Atlanta this past weekend. What is it that we don't talk about here? Opening up the conversation. What is it that we don't talk about here? Rational discourse has more opportunity for growth and motion forward, talking about the things that go unspoken, talking about the things that are more difficult, talking about these things with people who don't inherently and constantly and consistently agree with us. Well, that's how things grow and change and move forward. And yet, wow, there's so many things that we don't talk about. And this isn't about blaming it on one person or one party. The focal point is here there is so much disagreement about politics and social issues right now that there are too many companies, and yes, I'm voting, I'm passing judgment. There are too many companies that don't want people in their organization to talk about things that can cause rifts. And instead of creating an environment where the hard conversations can happen, they become taboo. Well, great. Here's the bad thing. If there are things that you don't talk about, if you create a category of content, we don't talk about this here. This isn't okay. Don't talk about politics. That's fine in theory, but you create a category of things which we do not talk about. Guess what? Other things fall into that category. Wow. Well, if there are things that we don't talk about, like politics, what else do we not want to talk about? Wow. So when these conversations happen between those two people and they're sniping at each other and it's creating an uncomfortable environment, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about Islamophobia. We don't talk about homophobia. We don't talk about gender differences in pay. We don't talk about, we start pouring more and more things into the bucket of stuff we don't talk about. Wow. What happens when we start sweeping things about day-to-day operations in as well? We don't talk about the fact that quality control is slipping. We don't talk about the fact that federal regulators said we need to look at this sensor switch on the airplane. We don't talk about the fact that Boeing was told to self-regulate and that's become the standard of the day. Inside organizations, we stop talking about things that are critically important to talk about because we've already learned we don't talk about this stuff from outside work. We're so addicted to our comfort zones that we create them and we create these tight boundaries around them and protect those comfort zones and we push other things that are uncomfortable away. And what happens? We stop attending to the things that are important. And I said, people who are invested in the status quo will try to keep others in a comfort zone. Diversity and inclusion means that minority groups need a third representation to change culture through conversations that can't happen without diversity representation. Again, when you sweep things under the rug and the conversations don't happen, when you maintain living in your comfort zone, wow, our aversion to discomfort is creating horribly uncomfortable cultural footprint. Our addiction to comfort. I believe our addiction to comfort is overcomplicating the workplace and putting people in a place where they are not bringing their full selves and they're dying a little bit each day. Yes, I like drama, and I also think it's accurate. Lawrence says, as a mediator, let me go back to where I can do this. I've naturally desired to listen to both political perspectives, but I find each so entrenched, not sure how growth can happen. And I think Lawrence, you've hit something key there, because we see people as so entrenched that we choose not to have the conversation. Yes, listening is the first piece. Absolutely. Then how do you talk about it? Hearing the other person is the first step. I think the challenge goes back to the 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 linearity of the ideas of alignment, understanding, and agreement. Well, here's the challenge. We often try to start with agreement. In other words, when you agree with me, once you agree with me, you're right. And until then, you're wrong. So all the language of a conversation when one starts with agreement is about convincing. We watched John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi spend years and years just talking at each other, trying to convince each other. I'm using them as a recent example. And whether you agree with them or one or the other, we lived through a phase and we're still in it now where it's all about agreement. Once you agree with me, you're right. And until you agree with me, you're wrong. And we stay entrenched. We surround ourselves with folk who believe like we do. We create those bubbles and we live entrenched. We never get to understanding. Understanding the other person's opinion and viewpoint doesn't mean we agree with it, but we never get to the point of understanding the other person, where they come from, how that opinion that they hold or those opinions that they hold have come up through their upbringing, their experience, their life. We don't grow to understand each other because we're still fighting and trying to convince to get to agreement. And God knows we never get to alignment. So the challenge is, the opportunity is working with folks who don't necessarily agree with you, stepping out of that comfort zone into the harder, or as Susan Scott calls it, the fierce conversation, and working towards alignment. Now, whether you like what happened during the Reagan era, you look at Reagan and Tip O'Neill. It's the example I always use in comparison to Pelosi and Boehner. And O'Neill and Reagan were exceptionally different and came from completely diametrically opposed viewpoints. The difference is they started with alignment. They were aligned around what was important for the country, or what they believed was important for the country. And from that place of alignment, they grew to understand each other, understand their differences and their viewpoints and how they came to be in those places. And through alignment and understanding, they came to agreement on what actions could be or should be taken. It's a very different path to move forward. Starting with alignment, moving through understanding into agreement. You can never get to agreement first. Requires starting with alignment, moving through understanding, and coming to an agreement to move forward. Larry says, perhaps because we are not taught how to talk about it without offending, or even more importantly, how to listen. And Larry, it goes back to the taking it personally piece. We take our viewpoints often so personally that if somebody doesn't agree, it feels like a personal attack, or we take it as a personal attack. So yes, how to talk about it, even how to listen to a conversation where there's a disagreement. Wow, that's an amazing learning opportunity for us. Listen without taking it personally. Listen without making assumptions. No, Rhonda offers up the Deborah Tannen's book, The Argument Culture. No, but A, I think we're living it, and B, thank you, Rhonda, because that's one that I'd love to look into. Thank you, Shelley. Don't surround yourself with yes people. In business and life, you must have those around you who challenge you and tell you the truth. Those who are so comfortable with you and love you enough, and they want to see you grow enough, they tell you the truth. Goodness knows we could use more people speaking truth to power. And in fact, one of the things we learn in team coaching, the program through Team Coaching International, There are often on teams folk who play the naysayer, the devil's advocate, and it's often an unconscious role that they take on. And whether it's because they're in the ER place of, oh, we're doomed, it'll never work, or if it's because they really are just obstructive. One of the most powerful tools to engage them and bring them back into collaboration with the team is to name the role that they're playing. Hey, thank you. You're playing that role of devil's advocate. We'd like you to do that actively. Even when you agree, can you come in and take that devil's advocate point? Even say, hey, hand up, I want to play this role. It's powerful in two ways. One is you engage that person on the team, and the other is you get them to disengage from the knee-jerk response and be conscious about it. And it gets them into the mode of adding the opportunity for growth to the team, because growth comes from those that we don't consistently agree with. Rhonda, thanks for throwing this in. How do you think social media has changed over time and made us less willing to listen and or have productive conversations? We get to hide behind the keyboard and the mouse. I think what's changed in social media is it's given us the ability to lob barbs and poke at each other without having to see the impact. No longer aware of our unintended impact, we're just broadcasting into the ether. So even when I get into, comment tiffs back and forth with people on social media, look, to be fair, there are people whose opinions have changed. It's not common. And yet we still have the conversation, and I still engage in conversation. But most often, for me, the conversations continue offline as well. When we only interact on social media, when it's only disconnected, we don't really have the opportunity for the human connection component. And when we divorce ourselves from that human connection, wow, it can become toxic. Interesting, Neil. One issue with that, though, is the cognitive dissonance. Overcoming that ingrained cognition is a start with agreement. And to move from there is, I agree with that. So let's talk about this over here. So playing with the impact of that discomfort, that disconnect in multiple footprints can make a tremendous difference in how we process things. And the most important piece is the initial leaning in, that I want to be in connection with you. So I will have this conversation, as opposed to this conversation is hard and we don't agree, so I'm going to withdraw. Or worse yet, I'm just going to keep screaming my opinion and not listen to you. The cure to this is recovering to connection. Now, you may or may not have a relationship with this person who doesn't agree with you, but you're human, so there's always the opportunity for connection. Recover to connection. That's the invitation to find the growth that comes from being with those with whom you don't naturally or consistently agree. So the invitation is, where are those places where you can immerse yourself with people with whom you do not always agree? What growth is available for you? Where can you let the genuine curiosity that we're born with, where can you understand and appreciate the differences of those around you? Where can you step into that courageous interaction and engage in rational discourse and grow from what's available? What growth is available to you? So between now and next week, what mindset will you choose?